The Volkswagen Golf GTI is one of our favourite cars. It's exciting and interesting to drive, yet practical and understated enough for you to actually justify buying one. This is its 7th generation, and fresh from a facelift, it looks and drives better than it's ever driven before. But let's take a look back in time to where it came from, and to have a look at how far it's come. The GTI was unveiled at the Frankfurt Motor Show in 1975, at which point it had practically no competition. It was built by the Germans, for the Germans, but in 1977 a handful of left-hand drive GTIs found their way across the channel. Within a few years it was selling by the thousands. One of the first things you notice about this Mark I Golf GTI is the slightly vague steering and the incredibly spongy brakes. When you press that brake pedal, very little happens. The other thing is the ride. It's slightly wallowy, slightly splashy. When I turn, there's quite a lot of body roll. And of course then there's the seat that's very slightly offset, and it does feel a little bit old-fashioned in here. Externally it was virtually indistinguishable from a vanilla Golf. Giugiaro created the crisp lines of the Mark I, and I think it's the best looking car that we have on the track today. But overall it was a timid start for the GTI, and for the hot hatch segment in general. This later Mark II also offers 110 brake horsepower, as well as a top speed of 119 miles per hour. The interior is a lot more modern. It has a lovely cassette player with both rewind and fast forward, and the driving experience is just generally more sorted. It makes the first car feel kind of timid in comparison, and I'm sure that this is what most people think of when they think of a classic Golf GTI. It inherits the basic look of the Mark I, as well as some of the now iconic GTI styling cues, but overall it's a chunkier sort of machine. And while brilliant to drive, the early Mark II's 8-valve engine feels rather breathless by today's standards. This later Mark III with a 16-valve engine feels a lot more like it. It's got 148 brake horsepower, a much higher top speed, and a quicker 0 to 60 time. Paul Hudson reckons this is the best looking car, although some people think that it's a little bit more portly than the Mark II. I certainly think that it's a lot more fun to drive, although it might have lost some of that sparkle that made the Mark II so special. Then comes the Mark IV. This 2003 car has 178 brake horsepower, which means that it's a fairly potent one by any standards, but I've got to admit, it's not the most engaging thing to drive. It has a 0 to 60 time of just under 8 seconds, but it still feels very ordinary. To be honest, it's a little bit boring. Its mumsy design is indistinguishable from that of the standard Mark IV, which was the middle-class second car of choice during the late 90s. It's my least favourite from today's lineup, so I'm grateful for what VW did next. I'm in the Mark V Golf GTI. It's got a more powerful engine, it's got a quicker 0 to 60 time and a much higher top speed. The whole thing just feels more sorted. It's much, much better to drive. I'm fairly sure that this is the point at which Volkswagen's Golf GTI got its mojo back. Its understated looks are still fresh, giving it sleeper-like qualities in comparison to the leery body kits found elsewhere in the hot hatch segment. It's my favourite Golf GTI, which is lucky because it's also cheap. If you're after practical performance, have a look for one of these on eBay. Soon followed the Mark VI. These are even nicer inside, and they're also sensible second-hand hatchbacks. They're bloated and chunky compared to those very early cars, but that's a small price to pay for things like airbags and sat-nav. This is the car that cemented the Volkswagen Golf GTI's reputation as the best all-rounder. It might not be the quickest hot hatch, it might not even be the best car to drive, however, it does tick a lot of boxes, and as a turbocharged family chariot, it's hard to beat. But that's exactly what Volkswagen did with the Mark VII. The first car I drove today was built in the 1970s, and this one was built just a couple of weeks ago. From where I'm sitting, it's pretty obvious what Volkswagen has been doing with the past 4 decades. The whole thing is just worlds apart from the Mark I. In the corners, the new Golf GTI feels fantastic. It has 100 brake horsepower more than the Mark I, as well as comfier seats, more safety equipment, and a cockpit-style instrument screen that displays a colour sat-nav between the speedo and the rev counter. On the first car, that space was occupied by LEDs. This car will also reach 62 miles per hour in 6.4 seconds and continue all the way up to 155 miles per hour, where it will stay until you run out of Autobahn. Today we've driven all 7 generations of the Volkswagen Golf GTI, from this early, timid first foray in the 70s through to this 17-plate car, which basically leads a market that Volkswagen helped create. All cars have changed a huge amount over the past 40 years, but if there's one car that really embodies that progress, it's this, the Volkswagen Golf GTI.